Kia ora, it's Nick from FilmConvert. I had a shave while I was waiting for you to come over from their last video where we did a quick flyover of FilmConvert Nitrate's film emulation. And in this video, I want to dig a little deeper and talk about grain. Now, grain is one of my favorite things. I never used to like it, and I was bitterly resistant to adding it to my footage. But I've come to embrace grain, and I think you should too. Grain has many good uses, and it gives your footage a certain visual interest, even if your viewers don't quite perceive it. The coolest thing about grain is that it's so tactile, it adds a certain texture and movement to your image. But before we go any further, let's address the elephant in the room. One place you probably won't see grain is this video right here, if you're watching it on YouTube. YouTube kind of hates grain. I'll talk about this in a bit, but if you really want to see the benefits of this video, then I've linked below to a mirror of it, which I've uploaded to Vimeo, when you can also download the original file and take a real close look at the grain. But since you're already here, let's discuss grain. Grain is the dancing speckles you see on the screen when you're watching analog celluloid film. It's silver halide crystals, which is a substance which makes film sensitive to light, and it's an integral part of the analog viewing experience. I would recommend watching films and observing how grain is used in them. You'll start noticing it everywhere. I've amassed a Darren Aronofsky collection of films on Blu-ray, and he's one of the more prominent users of grain. Many of his films are made using 16mm film stock, and he uses grain almost like a character. Filmmakers used to use grain to signify a kind of old-timey Hollywood aesthetic, but it's increasingly used in a kind of an avant-garde way, which is very exciting. If you watch the film Mandy, grain is a highly prominent part of the image. How does FilmConvert Nitrate use grain, you might wonder? You might have seen grain sold online as an asset, where the vendor supplies a scan of the grain and you drop it onto your timeline and toggle the blending modes to integrate it. It can have varying success, but we don't think it integrates that well. There's also artificial grain made of CGI. It's often called procedural grain. There's a native feature for this in Adobe After Effects, which you might have come across. Now, FilmConvert Nitrate's grain is different. We've scanned real grain and then Nitrate integrates it using the pixel characteristics of your footage, as well as a grain profile of the film stock that you've selected. While we pride ourselves on our exacting digital color science, we still very much consider ourselves part of filmmaking tradition. And so it's very important to us to include real grain. It's the one part of the software which isn't an emulation. There's a lot of room to get the kind of look you want with Nitrate's grain controls. So there are presets based on the film gauge you desire. 8mm takes on a softer, coarser look, while 35 delivers a fine grain, which is nearly imperceptible to viewers. It's good practice to start with a grain preset as your basis, and then engage the manual adjustment. So there's several controls here. The grain strength slider controls how prominent the grain will appear in the image. The grain saturation can be an interesting control to play with. If I was to select the monochrome film stock, the grain profile becomes desaturated because that's the grain profile of monochrome film stocks. But I could add traces of color to the image, and vice versa by desaturating it with a color image. The softness control changes the overall softness of the image, and then of course the grain size control. The rule of thumb is of course the smaller your gauge, the softer your overall frame and the larger the grain size. So with this shot of Hennessy, I'm going to go a bit Black Swanish and give a 16mm kind of a look to it. So I'm going to start with the Super 16 preset and then raise and lower the grain to my liking. Yeah, I'm liking how that looks. The next control is the grain curve. What you start with here on the curve depends on the film stock you've selected, and it can be used to change the grain strength within shadows, midtones, and highlights of your image. So in this video of Weichu, I'm going to increase the grain and highlights and make it dance a little in the sun and give the shot more movement. So you can see the curve for this film stock has the grain more prevalent in the midtones, and I'm going to just move it across a little. Now this look isn't for everyone, but I just want to show you how grain might be used as a creative effect. Grain is a really interesting subject, and we could go on about grain. But let's talk about this YouTube thing, huh? So if you've stuck through to this bit, you've probably been watching it on YouTube, and the grain probably doesn't look so great, if you could see it at all. There are many great places to exhibit your work. However, YouTube isn't one of them. YouTube's trying to get their videos to stream across the smallest amount of bandwidth, and so the codec optimizes this by taking away so much information. It carries pixels across frames, so detail like fine grain gets eaten up during processing. If you're going to use YouTube to show your work, then we will recommend increasing the size of the grain within the grain controls and uploading using ProRes. You can get some results, and you might need to play around a little bit if you can. YouTube's getting much better at delivering a quality image, but for now, you shouldn't expect it to be as good as if you were to deliver it on another platform, let's say, or using physical media. Yeah, so that's grain. But we're not done. Stick around for the third and final part of our 2022 nitrate walkthrough, which explores our secondary color controls and exporting looks. So see you then.